After more than 7 years in development, Days Gone finally arrives with its own take on the zombie apocalypse. It's a large-scale, open-world experience with a heavy focus on its narrative and characters. Think The Last of Us meets Far Cry. The Oregon-based Bend Studio delivers an impressive take on the Pacific Northwest, in which it's based, with richly detailed conifer forests and open plains serving as the backdrop. The scenery has a decidedly unique feel as a result of this setting, and the team also takes the road less traveled when it comes to technology, with an approach that differs from most other big first-party studios within Sony. On today's video then, we're exploring the world and presentation of Days Gone. Has Bend succeeded in building a seamless, detailed world, and how does it stack up on both models of PlayStation 4? We'll examine all that and more right here on Digital Foundry. The release of Days Gone marks a triumphant return to console development for Bend Studio. As its first original IP since the late 90s, Days Gone represents a major shift for the company. For nearly a decade, Bend has focused on creating high-end portable experiences for Sony's handheld consoles. This includes an impressive third-person sequel to the Resistance series crafted specifically for PlayStation Portable, as well as a portable installment in the Uncharted franchise, which was launched alongside the ill-fated PlayStation Vita. But beyond its return to the console world, Days Gone differs on the engine side as well. While most first-party studios within Sony have focused on homegrown, in-house technology, Bend has opted to build Days Gone utilizing Epic's very powerful Unreal Engine 4, albeit with some changes made just for this game. Days Gone is one of the first major Sony first-party games created using Unreal. It also presents an interesting challenge for the team and technology alike. This is a massive open-world environment rivaling the density of a Far Cry game, with traversal both on foot and on bike. While Unreal has proven very capable of delivering large-scale games, there aren't many examples quite like Days Gone. And the result is certainly interesting. Now, for starters, it's solid on both PlayStation 4 and the PS4 Pro. On the Pro, Days Gone appears to use a form of checkerboard rendering to reach an effective pixel count of 3840 by 2160, but the implementation isn't without flaw. While most scenes exhibit clean edges free of aliasing that can appear suitably 4K, there are other areas where you can spot double width pixels as a result of this implementation, giving the impression of a 1920 by 2160 resolution. It generally works well, but it's not perfect. On the base PS4 then, the resolution is dropped instead to 1080p predictably, like most first-party titles. Thanks to Unreal's temporal anti-aliasing, however, both versions appear clean yet a bit soft. There is no evidence of dynamic resolution here, but it's always a possibility in games like this, which is worth keeping in mind, I suppose. Aside from resolution, both versions appear remarkably similar in terms of overall visual quality, but there are some minor enhancements visible on PS4 Pro. This primarily manifests in terms of further refined shadow detail on the Pro, which is mainly visible in areas of foliage, but can be observed elsewhere if you look closely. Everything is just a bit more refined on the Pro basically, but really it looks great on both systems, as is usually the case with first-party releases. So yeah, no matter which platform you play it on, Days Gone looks great. In terms of performance though, we break all of this down in our performance analysis video on the game. What I can say here, however, is that the PS4 Pro experience has been superior overall in terms of consistency, at least in its current form. More than anything though, it's the game world that really stands out, and for good reason. Situated in Bend, Oregon, the development team is based in an area dissimilar from most other game development studios, and it's clear that this has served as inspiration for the game world. There's a density and atmosphere to the environment that is rather captivating and unique. And it starts at the lowest level, with impressive terrain and terrain detail rendering. The physically based materials are of exceptional quality, perfectly capturing the essence of dirt, mud, and moss across the forest floor. Individual plants are spread liberally across the environment and vary based on the region. Richly detailed greenery lines the forest floor, while wispy, dry grass is found across the outer plains. Other objects throughout the world are equally detailed, with fine texture work on both natural and man-made objects alike. The abandoned Nero facilities feel suitably high-tech, but it's the building interiors that stand out the most. I appreciate how random structures scattered across the world kind of tell a story thanks to careful design. It's not just a series of empty rooms as you might commonly find in most Battle Royale games. There's a care and attention placed into the design of each of them, which helps ground the world, delivering a place that feels as if it were once lived in. Remnants of a once thriving business can be found scattered across the floor, while echoes of a life once lived are visible in abandoned homes. And that sense of abandonment is enhanced by thick layers of dirt and dust applied to stationary objects across the world. As you venture into abandoned tunnels, ruined cars are caked with particles of the past. It really enhances the sense of ruin. And shadows play a significant role in delivering this sensation. In particular, Days Gone appears to use a form of screen space shadows to allow for finely traced shadow detail from small objects. Objects that typically wouldn't receive suitable coverage from traditional shadow maps. Look closely at the plants here and you can really see the benefits. The sharp outlines of the leaves are visible beneath each plant. Same with these small stones on this dusty ridge. I'm honestly surprised and impressed by the implementation here. It isn't a new technique or anything, but Bend Studio makes extensive use of it, more so than I've ever seen. And it's not just used for fine environment shadows. Dynamic lights such as the flashlight beam also display shadows using screen space information. But this highlights one of its flaws. When the source from which the shadow should be cast is occluded, the shadow disappears. And you may notice shadows disappearing around the edges of the screen as well. So it's not perfect, but it's an interesting solution to the shadow casting problem, and allows for generally finer detail and more shadows from more dynamic lights in general. Of course, more traditional shadows are used as well, and these are nicely realized and finely rendered, even moving in real time as the sun crosses the sky. If you look carefully, you'll even see cloud shadows projected on the glass, not to mention the play of light off transparent surfaces, in this case, the glass as well, which is a neat touch. Shadows also appear razor sharp around local objects such as your character and bike, but appear more diffuse on tree shadows which are cast from a distance, though they do not become sharper at the source. This is topped off with ambient occlusion, which is well implemented and ensures realistic ambient shadowing. All of this is combined to create a sense of depth in the world that is quite impressive to behold. This is enhanced by the game's weather system. Thunderstorms can appear during gameplay and the result is often striking. A wind system is used to increase foliage movement, resulting in plants and trees whipping violently around you as the storm unfurls. The variable rain density looks great, and rain particles are lit by dynamic lights, something which appears especially striking at night. A wet shader is used to give the impression of water soaking into the clothing and environment as well. Then there are the reflections. Screen space reflections utilized on both bodies of water, such as lakes and rivers, as well as in puddles, are spread across the environment. SSR is used on various other surfaces as well, when the materials call for it. Speaking of water, this highlights one complaint I have with the presentation. Water rendering itself is solid enough, and shallow streams realistically simulate the reflection and refraction of light, but none of the water reacts very naturally to player movement, so it often feels as if you're intersecting the water plane unnaturally. Some alpha textures are used to simulate moving through the water, but that's about it. It's a nitpick, but something I noticed. Still, overall, things are looking great thus far, but another important piece of the visual pipeline that we should talk about is lighting. Days Gone supports a real-time, time of day change, while offering a range of indoor and outdoor environments. A form of volumetric lighting, likely the frustum-aligned voxel type, is used throughout the game, enhancing the thick atmosphere of the world both in daytime and at night. I appreciate the way in which the volumetric lighting can interact with shadows while moving through darkened areas such as these tunnels, or the way raindrops glisten in the sunlight as you ascend this hill. It looks beautiful. In addition, an impressive height fog is also evident at points throughout the game, further increasing the sense of atmosphere. As for world lighting, I'm not entirely certain what method we're seeing here. While the lighting can shift throughout the day, I suspect we're looking at a mix of real-time and baked lighting. The combinations of the selected lighting system here with the physically based materials, however, can result in some impressively realistic scenes. Days Gone also uses what appears to be a procedural sky system, perhaps using some sort of noise pattern to give the impression of dynamic moving clouds. The clouds are designed to match the weather, so you'll have a mix of sunny days with clear skies mixed in with thick cloud cover and everything in between. The overall lighting solution isn't as robust as we've seen in some other games this generation, but it looks fantastic nonetheless. And in fact, the overall environment rendering is expertly executed. It's one of the more impressive examples we've seen of an Unreal-powered open-world game this generation, and as Bend's first large-scale project, I feel they've done an excellent job here. Of course, there are some notable limitations to consider as well. While the game features a range of objects such as gas cans that can react to fire and physics and the like, most of the world is really quite static in nature. Discharging your firearm into a tree, for instance, does not cause the branches to move or leaves to fall to the ground, nor is this possible with any of the objects scattered around the environment. Fire doesn't cause any burn damage, and it doesn't spread like Far Cry, and physics are only applied to very specific objects. Basically, you're limited in terms of what you can interact with. There are enough interactive elements in play, of course, but I feel that a slightly more robust world simulation would go a long way towards enhancing the level of immersion. And I say that because there's elements of the game design that kind of remind me of Far Cry 2. There are resources to manage, such as gasoline, and you need to worry about your bike damage, which can require repairs. Riding from one point to another on the map is an actual journey and requires resources, which makes for some engaging moments, but it lacks some of the nuanced features back in the now retro Far Cry 2. That's not to say that the game systems are not interesting to play with, mind you. Getting stranded out on the road and being forced to scrounge for supplies to get your motorcycle running again results in some rather unexpected moments. In one case, after being ambushed, my bike was damaged in the scuffle. I had to leave my bike and go scrounge for parts in a nearby town, but after returning with the necessary parts to repair the bike, I ran across an enemy trying to strip parts from it, which I promptly put a stop to. It's a minor thing, but little events like this are a nice touch and add to the realism in the world. Days Gone also places a strong emphasis on riding your bike. It's the primary method for traveling across the world, and as such, it's important that it feels great to control. Thankfully, that's exactly the case here. The physics system enables satisfyingly realistic handling as the bike bounces across the world while crossing different types of terrain and kicking up dust and dirt all around it. Sliding around corners or slicing through thick forests is surprisingly fun and almost reminds me of playing something like MotorStorm, especially once you get that nitro boost. You can upgrade your bike while playing too to further enhance the experience, and you'll even engage in combat sometimes while riding your bike, of course, primarily against human enemies since obviously the dead don't ride. Really though, the bike is one of the game's most successful and interesting mechanics, both from a gameplay and technical perspective. It's fun to ride, but its fragility plays a role in your survival. You'll need to manage your bike well, and that management is surprisingly engaging and leads to some interesting gameplay opportunities. But of course, equally important to the experience are the characters and character rendering. Days Gone is a surprisingly narrative-heavy experience with lots of real-time cutscenes and dialogue. It's a highlight for this game with great cinematic animation throughout. The main character Deacon is also voiced by old star killer himself, Sam Witwer, who has a great range and delivers a solid performance. But really, it's the overall character rendering that is perhaps most interesting to us. Looking at the big picture, I feel that the team has done a great job, but Days Gone doesn't really break any new ground. That's not to say there aren't some nice touches here. Skin, for instance, uses subsurface scattering both in cutscenes and during gameplay, something which becomes evident around light sources. In-game face and hair rendering is also high quality throughout, but it's the clothing that impresses the most. The physically based materials really help convey the sensation of cloth, leather, and the like with proper Fresnel and fine texture detail. I mean, just look at Deacon's hat, it looks fantastic. His costume features plenty of bits and bobs that jostle realistically as you jog across the land, and inverse kinematics ensure that weight distribution appears natural while ascending or descending steep grades. There's an impressive attention to detail when it comes to animation in general, in fact. Climb a box with your hands empty, for instance, and Deacon will use both arms. But if you perform the same action with your weapon drawn, however, he uses just one arm instead. Neat. Now, I will say that I am a tad disappointed in the game's implementation of motion blur, which could really enhance the weight of the animation. In fact, at first glance, it seems to be absent entirely, but if you pause and look closely, you'll see that it does appear during high-speed animations, but the shutter speed is extremely low. I would certainly love to see a shutter speed adjustment option in the menu. There's a nice variety of foes to face too, with a wide variety of different tactics. There's a nice mix between stealth and action. Sometimes you'll encounter just a few rippers or a handful of zombies filling an area, which can lead to sequences that take place in and around small, broken down towns. Other times you may encounter the Horde, which is one of the game's defining features. This large, ravenous pack of zombies can be found around the world, and losing them is not an easy task, leading to some interesting gameplay opportunities. It's neat to see so many individual models flowing across the terrain without resulting in any performance issues. We've seen huge packs of zombies in games like Dead Rising, so it's nothing new per se, but the way in which they chase the player around does feel fresh. Days Gone also offers full support for HDR displays, and it does so in a stunning fashion, with a perfect contrast between bright highlights, such as torches or the sky, and the much darker environments. It's one of those implementations that just kind of works, with minimal in-game adjustments, but it's a huge part of the overall experience. We should hopefully have a separate video showcasing the game's HDR mode in the future. So the overall package is solid in terms of visual presentation. The world is large and detailed, lighting is natural, shadows are beautifully implemented and bring a welcome depth to the environment, characters are lovingly crafted and expressive, and the zombies are plentiful. It's all good stuff, but that doesn't mean we didn't run into a few issues on occasion. For starters, during one session, I encountered a near complete dropout of audio. After completing a mission, I got this. And right after that pop, motorcycle, weapon, and enemy sounds basically disappeared, resulting in a nearly silent experience that persisted until I restarted the game. It's a very strange situation, but it only occurred once, thankfully. I also encountered an issue in one cutscene in which the dialogue and animation decoupled, resulting in broken lip-sync, not to mention some rather peculiar dips. Now there's more performance talk in the video dedicated to Framerate, but I wanted to mention these massive hitches that showed up on occasion when entering certain areas. Now, it's not a common occurrence, at least on the PS4 Pro, but as you can see, there's these massive drops on the frame time graph that result in noticeable stutter. And in general, you'll kind of run into stutter while exploring the world at high speed on your bike. In that sense, there's just this feeling that Days Gone isn't quite as polished as your typical Sony first-party release. Of course, there is still the day one patch to come at the time of making this video, so perhaps some of these issues will be ironed out by the time it's in everyone's hands. This is just the experience that I had while playing the game. I've also spoken with a couple colleagues that are playing the game as well, and one of them had run into serious texture streaming and hitching issues. This was on a base PS4, I should note, but it's not something I encountered during my own testing, so there does seem to be some sort of variability here. I can say for sure though that, at least at the time of editing, the PS4 Pro version of the game is quite solid, but there is still work to be done on the base PS4, and hopefully the day one patch will solve these issues. But despite the occasional glitch or hitch, the overall experience is solid. It's an interesting and often beautiful game, and while the zombie genre may be well worn at this point, the way in which Days Gone plays out feels remarkably fresh. Looking back over the games Bend Studios developed over the years then, Days Gone feels like a culmination of everything they've worked towards. It features a nice mix of stealth and action, not unlike the Siphon Filter games they developed, with the grittiness of their Resistance game turned up a notch while expanding on the storytelling skills they defined in Uncharted Golden Abyss. This once tiny studio responsible for the creation of Bubsy 3D has grown and expanded into something much greater. Days Gone may have taken years to develop, but it feels as if the studio has grown immensely in the process. But that's all for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this look at Days Gone, and if you're interested in framerate analysis, be sure to check out that video as well, which features data from the last patch released just before launch day. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.
What a thrill, with darkness and silence through the night.